Hey there, I'm Sarah A. Chrisman, the author of the Tales of Chetzemoka, and today I'm going to give you a tour of Port Townsend, where I live, which is the town that inspired the town of Chetzemoka in my books. The town of Chetzemoka is fictitious, but it owes a great deal to Port Townsend, Washington's Victorian seaport. Founded in 1851, Port Townsend experienced a boom in the 1880s. A great deal of late Victorian architecture still survives here and draws people to the city. It certainly drew us here. In my series, I renamed the town Chetzemoka for a few different reasons. In the first place, I thought it should be named after someone with a real connection to the place. The Marquis of Townsend never actually set foot here. He was a British nobleman who Captain Vancouver was trying to get money out of when he named the town. He wasn't the only explorer with this idea, so there are actually a number of different Port Townsends around the world. I wanted a name that was a little more unique to the place, and I took my cue from a more famous city on the east side of Puget Sound. The city of Seattle was named after Chief Seattle, the Duwamish leader who allied his tribe with early white settlers. He was roughly contemporary with Chief Chetzemoka, the Clallam leader who helped the settlers here in Port Townsend, so it wasn't such a huge leap to name this town after our local ally. Renaming the town also freed me up to take a few artistic licenses, like making use of certain buildings in the first book that, strictly speaking, shouldn't really be present until later in the series. I wanted visitors to Port Townsend to feel they're really walking in the footsteps of our Chetzemoka friends. A good place to start our Chetzemoka tour is Union Wharf, where Jacob first arrives in Love Will Find a Wheel. I actually wrote that scene sitting here on the wharf so I could get all the details just right. Right next to Union Wharf is the Hastings Building, where Kitty has her dress shop in the first book, and where Jacob locates his cycle shop in all the later books. You can see why it was so convenient for unloading the tricycle. In the books, the telegraph is located in the building just kitty-corner from Jacob's shop, and in the actual history of Port Townsend, this same building later housed the city's first telephone. Our city's location at the corner of the Olympic Peninsula made it vitally important to shipping in the 19th century, and this aspect of the place gives a definite maritime spin to the stories. Visitors to Port Townsend can still see wooden sailing ships like the Adventurous, and if you time things just right in the summer, you might be lucky enough to witness the stopover of various Northwest tribes on their annual canoe pilgrimage. There was a sawmill in 19th century Port Townsend, but there's nothing left of it now. What Port Townsend does still have is an early 20th century paper mill that's still in operation. It should look familiar to any fans of the Richard Gere movie An Officer and a Gentleman who happen to be watching this. In the movie, it was where his character's sweetheart worked. Since there's nothing left of Port Townsend's sawmill, for the scenes involving it, I spent significant amounts of time in the Sawmill Museum in nearby Port Campbell. Before we leave downtown, we'll make one more stop to see the Bishop Hotel. This historic Victorian hotel is where Nurse McCoy goes hunting for the fraudulent spiritualist Esmeralda in the third book of my Tales of Chetzemoka series, A Rapping at the Door. It really does have stylized pomegranates on its wainscoting, and the brass-grilled office window where Nurse McCoy scares the wits out of the poor concierge is real too. Onwards now to Uptown. Port Townsend was built on a series of hills, with the waterfront business district quite literally downtown at the base of a large bluff, and the residential district uptown at the top of the bluff. The Taylor Street steps which connect the two were originally made of wood back in the 19th century, and were replaced by concrete stairs in the 20th century. At the top of the stairs we find the fire bell tower that Kitty climbed to watch the race in First Wheel in Town, and of course right across the street we see the church whose whole congregation she scandalized, and where she then had to sit through a very embarrassing sermon. A few blocks away we find the post office, which not only has a mini museum exhibit of postal history inside, but also features stonework representations of Chief Chetzemoka and his family. If you look closely at the tops of the columns on the building's facade towards the water, you'll see the faces of Chief Chetzemoka and his brother, as well as Chief Chetzemoka's two wives, Chilil and Sihimitsum. Among the residences in Uptown we find Doc and Kitty's house, which is a cute little place, and the Kellums' home, complete with rose trellis and the stairs Jacob carried Addie up after she'd sprained her ankle. In Port Townsend's history, this historic home belonged to the customs inspector, and for a while it belonged to a friend, so a number of years ago I was lucky enough to be invited inside. The stars on the parlor ceiling weren't an exact map of the nighttime sky like the one Addie painted, but they were there. To get to Silas's house, we have to venture quite far afield, past the lagoon where dear little Sophie wanted to feed the ducks in delivery delayed, and then up the long hill that Felix raced up in Love Will Find a Wheel. The historic home that inspired Silas's is really quite amazing, and I've written a number of scenes standing at the side of the road across the street from it. I always enjoy imagining my characters going about their lives there. And now here I am back home in my den where I can write even more tales of Chetzemoka. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up, and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!